Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Well, how y'all doing today? Another very, very hot week ahead of us. It looks like I was looking at the weather and it's like, I think I'll stay inside. But no, I got chores to do, so just got to tough it out. So, by the way, the most important announcement you need to know is that the Juneteenth celebration on Saturday is going to be tonight. The weather supposedly was supposed to be bad, but it wasn't. Hang on, this silly phone. Anyway, there we go. Anyway, the Juneteenth celebration will be tonight, but I would definitely bring water because it's going to be a hot evening. And apparently, our friends, the weatherman, got it about as right as usual. We're going to have all this severe weather, and what we got, I'm not really sure, but we're going to have it tonight. So it's going to be a very special occasion for Burleson. It's a long overdue recognition, I think, and we're going to have a really good turnout from what I've seen on Facebook and other social media. There's a lot of people that are very interested in this, and so I'm hoping to make it as well. It depends on moving schedules. We're moving furniture around, so who knows? But anyway, the point is that Juneteenth is a very special day for a lot of Americans. It'd be inappropriate or just wrongly considered to think of this as a holiday meant for only a certain segment of our population. It's meant for all Americans. And if you look at it in the larger context, there's no question, Juneteenth is for all Americans. It's not just the day that the Texas slaves finally were apprised of their new status. And the clip I have from Henry Louis Gates is very, very illustrative about how this came about. But it also is, slavery is something that has been a burden on this whole country, in our history forever. And we can make all the rationalizations we want, that history of other countries and histories of other civilizations also employ slavery. Wonderful, great. It doesn't matter. It's been a bit burden on us. And so I think Juneteenth is a very appropriate holiday for all Americans, because it's not just the liberation of the African slave, but also the American white. Slavery is a two-way bondage. If you really want to know what I'm talking about, read the autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. He wrote his autobiography 3 times in various stages of his life. The first one's the narrative, written in 1846. And you read the appendix of it in particular. He talks about what slavery is doing to the white American as well, how it distorted their character, how in his experience that people that seemed to be benevolent were brutalized by the institution of slavery themselves. So it's very, very illustrative of this, and I hope that y'all are able to go to tonight and see what's going on with this. It's a long overdue holiday, and it's interesting to me that Texas was the first state to actually embrace, well, at least recognize Juneteenth. The first proclamation of it by the state of Texas, anyway, it was 1938 by Governor Allard, who read a proclamation recognizing Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth was a holiday that the Black communities in Texas had already been celebrating since the first year of it. It started in Galveston in 1866 and spread to other Black communities in the other various communities of the state. But 1938, rather, is when it was first announced as a proclamation. It became a state holiday and a state recognized day in 1968 as a state day, not particularly as a day off or whatnot. But there you go. And then by legislation in 1979, it became a state holiday. And then, of course, in 2021, we had the institution of it as a federal holiday. Now, not all states celebrate it as a federal holiday or as a state holiday. Only about half celebrate it as a state holiday, but it is a federal holiday for federal employees and whatnot. But the point I'm making is that Texas leads the way in this particular holiday. And it wasn't just because of a benevolence of the Texas government, by no means. It was also because of the activism and the activities of Black Texans like Opal Lee, who's become pretty well known for this. They worked for this for decades to make this a federally recognized day across the country. And I think the Black Texan needs to have special recognition for bringing this about across the country. But before we get into all the details, let's talk about the sponsors who make this kind of message possible for you. And they are very glad to be part of this message. I had a couple of them text me when I posted what I was doing for the week. They were very glad to be part of this. CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. The new owners, Lex and Haley, Bailey, I'm sorry. I get it right, sir, sister. Bailey and Lex will set you up. They have been the new owners for about a month now at CrossFitBurleson.com. You can see the website. You can see their messages, the plans. You can see the programs. They're trying to expand some of the offerings there. So check that out. You'll find it to be a very exciting opportunity at CrossFit Burleson. Also, Shandy Stogsdill, who's currently working hard on trying to get my daughter's house sold. I've been watching this kind of from a distance, and it's easy. And so I'm glad to have Shandy on my side on this. So she'll take care of you. She knows the details. She knows how to navigate the tons of legalities and paperwork. So talk to Shandy. Also, thank you to Otto, of course. I'll be seeing you Thursday at least, if not sooner. Our place, one of the great restaurants in the DFW area. It's won several awards on the highway in Alsbury. It's great food, great service, and great atmosphere. The same can be said for Wild Cigar. Thank you, Chris, for your support. Cigar and culture. Go get yourself a cigar. Go get yourself a decent drink on Juneteenth. It's a good day to reflect upon what this day means, and it's a good place to do it because you can actually hear yourself reflect. So it's a good place to do it. Wild Cigar and Culture over to Standard. Also, Tiffany Nico. Their magazine at Local Life Magazine will be out pretty soon. Well, for June, I mean, in about a week and a half, but it's already out there for sorry, Tiffany, for July. I'm going too fast. Local Life Magazine. The June issue is out. The July issue will be out on time as always. And also, you can also check out locallifetx.com and see what's going on up to the minute. She also has the party at the Pavilion on July 4th. So you want to check that out. There's a link, a QR code on her locallifetx.com page, and you can see all the information there. Thank you also to Gala at Southern Gym. They're going to be moving this week. It's going to be hot to move, but there you go. Southern Gym, fine jewelry and gemstones. Gala is going to be up and running probably within about a week and a half down at that new location down at the bottom floor of the Windmiller building. And a lot of people are very excited to see this and hear about it. So be sure to check that out when she's open. They're open still this week in their current location. So go check them out if you have any needs for repairs or anything else like that, or new inventory. Thank you also to John over at All Pro. He came by Friday to check my roof out. Call John Williams, 817-734-2756. He came by and he said my roof was in good shape. I was afraid that maybe it had some hail damage from the previous hailstorm we had about a week ago. And he said, no, it's in pretty good shape. It's a fairly new roof, but the thing about it is he wasn't trying to upsell me on something or try to make me think that I had a problem when none existed. So he's an honest man, and All Pro is an honest company. If they can help you, they will. If you don't need their help, they'll tell you. So 817-734-2756. Also, Melissa Harmon, she'll also tell you to check the roof out. She has been swamped with phone calls about people checking out their insurance. You should know what your insurance is beforehand. Texas Farm Bureau Insurance has got a reputation for dealing with their clients better than any other insurance company. And Melissa is a very, very hardworking agent. 682-804-0534, 682-804-0534. Call her if you want to check out your policies, and she'll tell you if she can save you some money. If you're a Farm Bureau holder right now, a client already, check out your insurance and make an appointment with her. Also, Stop Restoration, Lisa and Morris Smith, they get it right the first time. If you had some damage from the hail and the water damage comes from that, then you might want to make sure that the damage is not too extensive, because if you just let it go, it's not going to get better on its own. And in this heat and in this situation, you're going to have probably excessive mold damage if you let it go too long. So call Lisa Morris over at Stop Restoration, where they handle it right the first time. Whew. All right. It's hot. How about it for you, Taylor? It's very hot. I'm trying to find my water bottle.
It is warm for sure.
It is. I'm sitting here under this lamp here and I'm sweating. But anyway, back to the more important thing, Juneteenth. The thing about Juneteenth, what I like most about it is because it's an organic holiday in a sense. It wasn't something that the Congress of the United States or even the state of Texas decided to create. This was something that the people themselves created. They took it upon themselves to create celebrations on the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, as the clip they're about to show you from Henry Louis Gates will tell you, the Emancipation Proclamation really only in reality emancipated a few thousand slaves, because it pointedly exempted slaves in the Union states, which would be at that time Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. It did not really have any effect on the slaves in the Confederate areas. It was only applied to D.C. and those areas in which the Union Army controlled of Confederate territory, like New Orleans, for example. But as the Union Army goes through, the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect. And what Juneteenth is about is that on June 19th, Gordon Granger, the Union Army, head of that area of Texas, of the Union Army, that particular Union Army, say it right, read a proclamation in Galveston announcing the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the details of history are a little bit murky. Did he actually read it, or did he just post it, or was it read to them? It doesn't matter. It was announced on Galveston on June 19th, 1865. And that's when the last of the Southern slaves in Texas were notified of their emancipation. But I think really Dr. Gates's approach is so much better. So Taylor, if you to roll that clip, please.
Well, last year, President Biden made Juneteenth the newest federal holiday. June 19th marks the date in 1865 when the last enslaved people in America found out that they were free. CBS News special correspondent James Brown spoke with renowned Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. about the history and the significance of Juneteenth.
Juneteenth was not embraced as a national black holiday for a long, long time, but it was kept alive by black people in Texas. And that's what's so sweet about it. Our people have been hungry for holidays, hungry for tradition, hungry for stories about black history.
Because
without a past, you have no future. Did you like Harvard?
perhaps no one has done more to inform Americans of their past and in turn their future than Henry Louis Gates Jr. By day, he is a professor and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard.
I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. Welcome to Finding Your Roots.
By night, he is the host and producer of the PBS genealogy show Finding Your Roots, as well as countless documentaries on Black history.
These are the big three in the history of freedom of our enslaved ancestors. The Emancipation Proclamation, signed on January 1st, 1863, Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, and then finally the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, which is what finally and ultimately abolished the institution of slavery.
Why do you think that June 19th stuck?
One of the reasons that I think Juneteenth stuck is that we're all charmed by the poetic brilliance of the name, Juneteenth. What better name for a June 19th could there possibly be? That's great, it's fetching, it's catchy.
As with all catchy names, Gates says there is also a bit of fiction around that day in 1865 when Gordon Granger issued General Order No. 3 to free the enslaved black people of Galveston, Texas, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, we were raised to think that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, right? The problem is that the Emancipation Proclamation in and of itself didn't have the power to free anybody. It only applied to enslaved people in the Confederacy, and it can only be enforced if Union troops had captured territory in the South, in the Confederacy. Only about 500,000 enslaved men and women, we think, actually got their freedom from the Emancipation Proclamation. And James, there were 3.9 million enslaved African Americans. So the overwhelming majority of our ancestors were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation.
So the significance then of General Gordon Granger going to Galveston?
We all think that the Civil War ended when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, which was April 9th, 1865. But that's not true. There were several different Confederate armies. So Texas finally surrenders to the Union on June 2nd. Gordon Granger comes, and on June 19th in Galveston, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation because now the Union Army is in possession of the territory. So that's the true story.
And what about the notion that enslaved black people in Texas did not know they were free?
One of the myths about Juneteenth is that nobody in Texas had heard about it. But there are two reasons that many historians think that black people knew about the Emancipation Proclamation too. One is because of the proverbial grapevine. So there was this miraculous way for enslaved people to communicate plantation to plantation and state to state. But the second factor is that because Texas was removed from the main action of the Civil War, many slaveholders moved to Texas for safety, and they took their enslaved people with them. Those enslaved people would have known about the Emancipation Proclamation by and large and would have told other enslaved people. But no one could enforce it because the Union did not capture territory then. When I came here, I dedicated this tree in honor of my mother and father.
Professor Gates says the most important thing about Juneteenth is the era that came after.
The most radical thing that happened after the end of the Civil War for the rights of our enslaved ancestors were the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the Reconstruction Acts. This was the first concentration of black power. In the summer of 1867, 80% of all eligible black men who were formerly enslaved in the South registered to vote. And in 1868, they actually voted. Ulysses S. Grant won the presidency. So you could reasonably say that black men had elected a president of the United States.
Back in Galveston, Texas, the formerly enslaved began marking their freedom with the celebration 1 year later in 1866 and have been celebrating Juneteenth ever since. As far as Professor Gates is concerned, the details of Juneteenth are less important than the power of its message.
There's a kind of poetic magic in that story, a kind of comfort, a kind of retribution, a kind of belated administering of justice that appeals to all of us. Juneteenth is one of the first holidays that black people created on their own. And of the holidays that they created in slavery times, Juneteenth is the one that survived and is now a national holiday.
Isn't it important for all Americans to understand that Juneteenth ought to be embraced by all Americans?
For a country built upon the love of freedom, any manifestation of the enjoyment of freedom should be celebrated by all our countrymen. Let's hope for that day.
In Cambridge, Massachusetts, James Brown, CBS News.
I just thought that was a much better way of illustrating the history of Juneteenth that I could sit there and mumble through, because I really like Dr. Gates. He has an excellent series on the Reconstruction on PBS, and he also is an author on several books on that era. And it's very balanced and well written, and it's not an agenda-driven history. So I really enjoyed his productions. Also, the thing about it, what I think, if you want to look at what slavery and the issue of the Civil War and whatnot did on our country, we still live with the issues today. Some, I will admit, are made worse by the very far fringes of both sides of this conversation on race for their own purposes. But the vast majority of Americans really do want to live in peace and really do want to live in a fair and racially equal society. I'm convinced of that. And I think in the last 40 years of my existence, I've seen more people willing and wanting that kind of harmonic relationships between the races than when I was a kid growing up. And the thing about it is, my generation, I'm about 61 years old. I was the one among the very last of the Jim Crow babies, you might say. Up until the fourth grade, I did not go to an integrated school. And then when I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, they had just begun integration because of a Supreme Court order, the Swan versus Mecklenburg County case, if you want to look it up. And so I went to school as a fifth grader in an integrated school. And it was no big deal. Now, I'm not going to say it wasn't a big deal outside of that little school. It was. There was all sorts of news reports of chaos at the high schools and protests and things of that nature. But as far as Miss Holcomb's 5th grade class, it didn't really occur to us what the deal was. Now, many, many years later, I mean, just a few years ago, I asked my parents how they felt about me being bused to schools outside of our neighborhood. And the racial concern didn't come up. What the concern was the distance, because I was 45 minutes away. And if something happened one way or the other, I got sick, there was a problem, there's I don't know, fire at the school, you name it, some problem, there'd be, 45 minutes away. That's what bothered them. The fact that I was sitting next to a black student, they never mentioned. And I never got that impression that it was a problem. And I'm fortunate. I grew up in a home in which that was not an issue, ever. Now, I'm not going to tell you we were marching in Selma and all these other things and, try to make myself look and my family look greater than it is on this issue, but it just never came up. And I wish that was the approach that was more and more of the issue of the day. It never came up. And I'm very grateful for that because I think it's shaped how I viewed a lot of these things. The thing also I like about looking back on this era is that you could see in the person of Abraham Lincoln just how much attitudes could change. Abraham Lincoln today is often criticized by some of the more academic left for being a racist and all this other business. And by our enlightened standards, and I put that in quotation marks, yeah, Lincoln had some racial views that would be not very popular today. His view, first of all, is what to do with the freed slaves is not so much to integrate them in society, but help move them back to Africa, back to Liberia, which was formed in the 1820s just for that purpose, or to gradually bring them into society. By the standards of his time, though, Lincoln was far ahead. By the standards of his time, he was a great statesman. Frederick Douglass came to that point. Well, Frederick Douglass first had a great deal of dismay and distrust and even a little bit of scorn for Abraham Lincoln until, as the course of the war went on, and the goals of the war changed from strictly being one of maintaining the Union to also including the abolition of slavery. And I want to make that point clear. Abolition of slavery was not the primary purpose of the war in 1861, but it became that way in 1863. Douglass began to understand how Lincoln operated. And I think Lincoln himself, if you look at the way he dedicated himself to the passage of slavery, 13th Amendment that ended slavery, rather, let's say that right, the passage of the 13th Amendment that ended slavery, as it was well illustrated in that movie Lincoln, which as a history teacher, I could tell you is one of the best history movies I've ever seen. It's, it's got some Hollywood in it and all this, and it truncates time frames a little bit, but I think it was extremely accurate about the political maneuvering to get that thing passed and the attitudes at that time. It's a wonderful movie for history. But back to the matter at hand, you see how Lincoln himself was transformed by the war and by the necessity to get rid of slavery and get rid of this. And his plan for reintroducing the states into the Union was benevolent. One of the worst tragedies in our history was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, ironically done by a Southerner. Because what the Reconstruction era is one of the saddest and most depressing eras in which you want to look at. And it's still, for a century or better, still divided this country. But I really think that Abraham Lincoln, again, understood the Civil War. And he came to a conclusion what it was at the end. It wasn't just a battle between states. It really wasn't even a battle between ideologies. It was judgment, God's judgment. You read the second inaugural, which is, in my opinion, the greatest speech ever any American ever said, followed very closely by Gettysburg Address, followed very closely with I Have a Dream. Then you'll see that his attitude has changed. And he said, this is the problem. I'm going to read it to you, but I'm also going to show you the Daniel Day-Lewis clip, which will kind of go over some of the same things. But I think Daniel Day-Lewis does such a great job that I don't think anybody who approaches that role of Abraham Lincoln is going to do it just as he did. But what he understood is that it's judgment. It says both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invoke his aid against the other. It might seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge, not that we be judged, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered, that neither of them have been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. And here he quotes the scripture itself. Woe unto the world because of the offenses, for it must needs be the offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses, which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove it, and that he gives to both the North and the South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense shall come, we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in the living God have always ascribed to him. I think that, and then the rest Daniel Day-Lewis will pick up. I really think this is, pretty clear. He said that God had ordained this war because of the offenses of slavery. And we can rationalize all we want about other societies and that this is the way that the world worked and all this other stuff. It doesn't matter. That's not an excuse. I don't hold my country in contempt for it. I really don't. I accept it as part of our history. I love this country. I love its history. And you know what else? So do many and most, if not all, the Black Americans I know love this country and love its history. They understand. We understand that not all parts of American history are fun fairy tales and stories of valor and heroism or whatever else. But almost every Black American I've ever encountered through my life loved this country. The armed services have a predominantly higher percentage of Black soldiers than the population at large. And so I'm saying to you that Abraham Lincoln understood that. I'd like to read that last sentence again. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses in which the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove it, and he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense shall come. Oh, I'm sorry, I got a text right in the middle of that. Of course it did. I'll read again. He now wills to remove it, and he gives both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense shall come. We shall discern in any departure from him those divine attributes which the believers in the living God always ascribe to him. In other words, God's judgment, as Lincoln will say, is true and righteous altogether. So, why don't you play that clip on Daniel Day-Lewis there, Taylor, if you would, please.
President is no more. Now he belongs to the ages.
Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Can you imagine the president today saying something that eloquent and that moving and that unifying? That's depressing right there, but that's for another show. The point I'm making is that this is a holiday for all Americans. Not only were the Black American freed from the burden of slavery, so was the white American. Slavery was a burden on both. It is a plague on both the slave and the enslaver. The effects of this are still with us, but we are moving forward. I really do believe that. I really believe that we are moving forward. And I think today is a good day to reflect upon that. If you're able to go to the Juneteenth celebration tonight, I think hopefully this little modest podcast will give you some additional thought to reflect upon. And we thank you for this opportunity to say these things. And we thank you for the patriotism of all Americans towards this. And I hope as time goes on, Juneteenth will take its place among the great American holidays like Memorial Day, 4th of July, Veterans Day. Okay, as far as the rest of the week, tomorrow I'm talking with Victoria Johnson. And then on Thursday, we're going to be at 9 o'clock. I have some errands I have to run Thursday. And 9 o'clock, I'm going to be talking about the indictment of Mr. Trump. And is it fair or not? Is it selective enforcement or not? Is it appropriate or not? All those things. So 9 o'clock will be the special time then. And I thank you for listening in. I hope you share this with your friends. And thank you. And you have a happy Juneteenth.